Welcome to lesson number 3, and as you can see it is another day because I'm wearing some other clothes, but that is not gonna stop us because today we are gonna learn all about how we can lay out our website page. So right here you can see the page that we will be building in this course, and the method that we will be using to build the layout is called grid. And grid is somewhat like this chessboard over here. If you look at the chessboard you can see a whole lot of numbers, but what do they mean? Well, if you look at this square for instance, it is called C6, and it is called that because it is in row 6 and in column C. And because of that it's called C6. The same thing goes for F1. It is in the bottom row, which is called 1, row 1, and in column F, so 1F, F1. And we're going to use the exact same system to build out our website page. So if I go back to Photoshop and look at the page that we will be building in HTML and CSS, you need to imagine that this is now our chessboard. And we're just going to divide it in little tiny squares and give those coordinates. I'm first going to divide this page with a few lines from top to bottom like this, and from left to right like this. So we have now built out our own little chessboard sort of thing, right? You can actually divide your page up in any way you like. I could have, for instance, also put a line over here between these two pictures and over here, but I've chosen not to do that because I will be lining those pictures out with another method. I also like to keep my grid really simple because you can make it a lot more complicated, but if you don't need to, I would try to not make it too complicated. If you make your own grid, it's also important to put a line at the top, at the bottom, completely on the left and completely on the right. It is not enough to just put the dividing lines in. You also need those lines on the outside. Now we need to give all of these rows and columns numbers, except that it works a little bit different. We are not going to give this whole column a number. We're going to give this line a number, and this line a number, and this line a number. So instead of column 1 and 2, it's going to be line 1, line 2, and line 3. So let's do that real quickly. I'm just going to call it V1 because of vertical 1. And this one is going to be vertical 2. And this one is going to be vertical 3. And the same thing goes for the rows, which is from top to bottom. So this is going to be row, so R1, R2, R3, and R4. Now we're going to determine the dimensions of the page. And there are many ways you can do this. You can do this, for instance, with pixel values or with percentages. I always want the page to fill the whole screen from left to right. And because of that, I'm going to use percentages, because if it evens out to 100%, it's going to fill the page. So this page is cut in half. So I need to call this part 50%, this part 50%, and together they are 100%. And that way they will always fill the whole screen from left to right. From top to bottom, that is a little different. Why? That is because you can scroll on websites, right? Hopefully you've been on the interwebs before and have discovered the magical property of scrolling like this. And because of that, I'm going to use pixel values. And honestly, it's not that important that you get this one right away, because you can just change it later. For now, I'm going to say, let's make this one 50 pixels. So that's the navigation bar, 50 pixels high. If this one is 50 pixels, this one should probably be something like 300 pixels. Let's then make this one 250 pixels. And let's make this one 220 pixels. So now it's time to put these squares into HTML. And remember, HTML is the thing we use to put things, well, in the browser. CSS helps us make it look a lot better. Here we are in HTML. We already did this in the previous lesson. And right here on the right, we have an empty canvas. So let's get to work. I'm gonna switch back and forward between Photoshop, so don't be confused by that. In HTML, I'm gonna enter something that is called a div. And a div is a container that you can put anything into, but in itself, it's really not anything. Because if I save this, well, you won't see anything. But if I put something in here, like we did in the previous lesson, h1, and let's type something like this is a title, and save it, well, there it is. But as long as I put nothing in it, you can't see it. There is another way that I can make this visual, and that is by using CSS and giving it a background color and dimensions. So let's just try that out really quickly. So if you go to style.css, which I have connected in HTML with this link, in here I can type div and use the curly brackets. And let's say background green. And now we need to determine the dimensions. So let's say width 200 pixels and height 200 pixels. And as you can see, now we have a green square. And if I remove this div, the square is gone. So that is a div. It's a container that you can put stuff into. As in of itself, it's really not anything except if I give it dimensions with CSS. So every part of my website I'm gonna put in a div. And because of that, we need to determine how many divs we need. So let's look at the page. We need the navigation bar, that is div 1. We need this square with the text and the title. And these two are gonna be separate. So this is square 2. The one with the grayed out picture, that is square 3. The one with the 3 pictures is just one div. At least we are gonna make it one div. So that is div 4, and the footer is gonna be div 5. And we can give all of these squares pretty obvious names. For instance, the first square we can just call nav, short for navigation bar. So how we do that is we go in this first tag and we're gonna type ID, hit tab, and let's type nav. And now we have given this div, oh, and we need to remove this bit of code because that is applying those CSS properties to the div. But as I was saying, we have now given this div the ID of nav. And that will help us to give it some specific properties in CSS, because we can now target this div specifically. If I add another div and I do not give this an ID, I do the same thing as I did before. So we now have 2 divs above each other, but instead of div I type hashtag, which is the thing you need to put in CSS if you want to target an ID. And now I type nav and I save it. Just one of them gets the property. Right here I'm gonna target the div again. So this is gonna target any div, but right here I'm targeting hashtag nav, which is the ID nav in the HTML, which is only this div, and I'm gonna make it red, for instance. And now if I save this one is gonna be red. Because one of the most important rules when it comes to how you work with CSS is that the more specific you are, the more important the rule is. And because I'm now specifically targeting only this div, the rule make hashtag nav red is more important than make a div green. So that way you can make hierarchies of rules with CSS. I'm gonna delete this for now, so it's gone again. And now I'm just gonna add all of the divs that we are going to need with their own ID. So the next part is, let's call this text, ID text, ID image gray, div ID images, because there are 3 images, and the last one div ID footer. There we go. So there really are now 5 divs right here, but you just can't see them because we have not given them any properties. Now we're gonna make the grid in CSS and we're gonna assign these divs that we have now made to parts of this grid. And that way they know their proportions and we can actually fill up the page. The first thing that we need to do is tell CSS that we are going to use the method grid to lay out our page. And we do that like this. We type body, which is all of the stuff that is visible on the page, curly brackets, and we're gonna tell it that the display type, so display, is grid. Now we have declared it grid. Now we're gonna type grid template columns and grid template rows. In here we need to add the dimensions that we have made earlier in Photoshop. So if we go to Photoshop, we can see that our column dimensions are 50% and 50%. Now we could type 50% and 50% here. That would work, but there is another way that I like just a little bit better, and that is 50 view width, so VW, which stands for view width, and it basically does the same thing. For some reason it sometimes works a bit better. VW for this one as well. And right here we just need to enter the values that we entered right here, those pixel values. So that's going to be 50 pixels, 300 pixels, 250 and 220 pixels, like that. And now we have told CSS the dimensions of our grid. Now it's time to place these divs that we have made in HTML on the right spots in the grid. And yes, at this point you won't see any changes to the page yet. It's first time to address all of the divs that we have made right here in CSS. So let's type hashtag. That is the way we addressed a ID in CSS. So hashtag nav curly brackets. Let's look at our HTML. Well, the next one is text. So that's going to be hashtag text curly brackets enter. Next one is going to be image gray, hashtag image gray curly brackets enter. Oh, you get the point. And now I'm going to give every one of these div a different color, which will help us see if we did anything wrong. Because when we put the coordinates on these divs, they will show up right here in the color that we assign it right here. So just like this, go background color, and let's just give it a random color. And whoa, what just happened? You can already see them appear. And it looks like the grid is all right, but these squares are not taking up the right places yet. What they are doing right now is just filling them up one by one. And that is not what we want them to do. Instead, we're going to tell every one of them to stay in their own little box or lane, if you will. And that works like this. You need to type grid column, enter, and grid row. If we switch over to Photoshop real quickly, we had given all of these lines their own coordinates, like vertical line 1, vertical line 2, and vertical line 3, and well, the same thing goes for the rows. And now we are going to tell the navigation bar to stretch from V1 to V3. So in grid column, we're going to type 1/3, and let's save it. And as you can see, there is our navigation bar. It's actually already doing it correctly when it comes to the rows, but I'm gonna declare it anyways. That would be 1, 2, 2, and nothing is gonna change because it already did that. And now we need to do the exact same thing for, well, every one of these divs. So I'm just gonna copy this over. This one is V1 to V2, so this needs to be 2, and it is R2 to R3. I know that this square is the same row. It is one column to the right. So it's going to be 2, 2, 3. The blue square with the images inside is again a little different because it stretches over 2 squares. It's going to be V1 to V3. So grid column 1 to 3 and grid row R3 to R4. 3 to 4. If I save it, you can see, well, there it is. And the footer needs to do nearly the same thing, just one layer below it. So that's going to be row 4 to 5. And there you go, there is our layout. There is something that is bothering me a little bit, and that is this white line on the outside. And that is a default property that the body just has, which is called margin. We'll get on to what that is later on, but I'm just gonna remove this for now. And that can be done by typing margin 0. And as you can see, now it's gone. If you want, you can already start changing the colors to the colors we have in Photoshop and make it look a lot better, but I'm not gonna do that for now, mainly because this line helps me align the images and the text later on. You have now actually learned how to build a simple layout and how to use grid basically. And in the next lesson we'll start putting content on the page. But thank you for watching for now, and I'll see you in the next lesson.